Welcome to the Data Science Hangout, everybody. Thank you so much for being here with me. And I don't have Rachel today. She is enjoying a nice vacation. So it's just me. And I'm also really nervous because I've never done this by myself before. So be extra nice to me. Um, and I hope that you have a wonderful time. This is a space that we have um, really kind of cultivated together. And it's an open space to hear what's going on across data science. We have people calling in from all over the world. We chat about data science leadership. We connect with others who are facing similar problems. And it's every day on Thursday, same time, same place, most Thursdays. Every once in a while, we will miss one for a holiday or for conference. We are all really dedicated to making this a friendly and warm and welcoming space. And we love hearing from you no matter your years of experience, your title, your industry, what language you work in. Everybody is welcome. If you're watching this recording in the future and you want to hang out with us live, there's going to be details below for you to add it to your calendar. So we really enjoy connecting with everybody in the chat, and we want to encourage you to just briefly say hello, drop a link to your LinkedIn or to your personal website. I have found over the years hanging out in the Hangout that oftentimes I will say hi to somebody and then I won't get their LinkedIn or their personal website or anything, and their name will be like Amy Smith, and I'll never find them again. So let people know who you are and where they can find you. You can also share in the chat any roles that you might be hiring for. Please do that. And if you're looking for a role, let everybody know what you're looking for and what you would like to do and see if we can make some connections that way. There are 3 ways to jump in and ask questions today, or just share your own experience if you want to chime in with something. So you can raise your hand on Zoom and I will call you to just unmute and ask your question. You can put your question in the Zoom chat. Isabella and Curtis are behind the scenes making sure that all of those questions get to me somehow. Thank you so much, Isabella and Curtis, and Randy's here. And then you can also put an asterisk next to your question if you might be somewhere noisy or your mic doesn't work and you would like us to ask that question for you. We would be happy to do that. We also have an anonymous way to ask questions, which is Slido. So Isabella has put a link in the chat. It says you can ask anonymous questions here. We will keep track of that throughout and try to grab any anonymous questions that we see. All right. We are joined today by our co-host, Alex Gold. I'm so excited to talk with him. He leads solutions engineering and support teams at Posit. So welcome, Alex. And I would love to get started by just having you introduce yourself. Tell us what you do and a little bit about yourself outside of work.
Yeah, absolutely. It's great to be here. I was messaging Libby ahead of time that we would count this as a success as long as neither of us vomit on the camera. So, that's the bar we're setting. We're going to nail it.
Gonna be fine.
Yeah, we're going to do great. We're going to do great. A little bit about me. So, thanks, Jeff. That's helpful. um, so, yeah, I lead the solutions engineering and support teams here at Posit. My background is in math and econ. I'm an econ PhD dropout. Sort of wound my way into data science and was a data science manager for a while, and then came to Posit about 5.5 years ago as a solutions engineer, was an individual contributor, and then sort of moved back into management here at Posit when an opportunity presented itself. Outside of work, I live in Silver Spring, Maryland, right outside DC, with my wife and our puppy and our 4-month-old, which has been an adventure for the last little while. And other than data stuff, I like doing landscaping and house projects, and have been a martial artist for 24 years. So that's my big out of work hobby.
Wow. What kind of martial arts do you do?
I've done a bunch of different things. The main thing I've done is Tong Sudo, which is a Korean punching and kicking thing, kind of like Taekwondo, if you know anything about it. Also Japanese small circle jiu-jitsu, and I've spent a few years each studying Tai Chi and Bando, which is a Burmese martial art, but mostly Tong Sudo.
That's amazing. Well, okay, don't cross Alex. He'll come for you. Okay. Well, I would love to hear a little bit more about your educational background. So you said you were in math and economics. What led you the data science route, and what made you decide to drop out of the PhD program?
Yeah. So yeah, my background, it was a at the university I went to. I went to Wesleyan University in Connecticut, and we like didn't have minors or I don't remember exactly the deal, but it was like this joint major of math slash econ. It was like one major that was both of them. So that's what I did in undergrad. And then I spent a while working in like the DC think tank world, doing policy analysis and that kind of thing. And I spent a bunch of years doing that, and did a lot of different kinds of policy analysis, some really quantitative, some much more qualitative, and realized that like the thing I had always loved about economics um, was sort of that it's this funny mashup of like math and people, or like, especially if you're doing, for any of you who have econ backgrounds, right? Like I was doing exclusively microeconomics, mostly like what you would broadly classify as like labor economics. And so it was all about like people and numbers. And it turns out that like if you add some computer stuff in there, you basically have data science. And at the time, data science didn't really exist as a field, but when I was a few years out of school, it started becoming sort of more of a real thing. Um, so the PhD part was sort of in the middle of my think tank time, when I was like, oh, if you want to like move up at a think tank in DC, you kind of got to go get a PhD. So I did that. I started it. Decided it really wasn't the right career path for me. Was very lucky to have a lot of support from family and friends, which was really meaningful, and dropped out after a year with my master's, which was actually a great deal because I got a master's degree for free because my program was funded. So
Oh,
if any of you
wow.
have not gone to grad school, what a piece of advice I got from a professor when I was still in undergrad, they were like, when you go to grad school, do a PhD program and only go if it's funded. And then if you don't want to finish, you get your master's for free in a year. And it turned out that was great advice because that's how it worked. To be fair, I'm not sure I learned a lot in that master's degree because it's all like first year econ PhD stuff, which like Curtis, right? Like you have a PhD in econ, you know that first year. Whew, it is not real material. It's just
Yeah.
prep for the rest. Uh, so like whatever.
I
But
mean, still, for nothing to sniff at. Free master's degrees,
yeah,
nothing to
free
sniff at.
masters,
I
right?
am still paying mine off.
Yeah, it opens doors even if the stuff you learned is right. It's a credential, and that is valuable in certain ways. Um, so yeah,
Well,
then after I think I think I hit it. Whatever.
no, I think you did. I'm curious about, so you went from a sort of research think tanky role
Yeah.
into data science,
Yes.
and you felt like that was kind of a natural progression. What is DevOps though? Because you're a solutions engineer. What does a solutions engineer do? And you just
Yeah.
wrote a book about DevOps. So can you talk about what
Yeah.
solutions engineering is or looks like for you every day? What kind of problems you solve?
Yeah. So I think an experience that I had, and I think many data scientists have, I'm sure many people in this room have had this experience, is like as you get more serious about doing data science, sort of like all roads lead down the stack, right? You start, and you're like, yeah, I'm gonna like build this sweet machine learning model or whatever. And then you're like, oh, but the data sucks. So I gotta clean the data. And then you're like, oh, but like the database sucks. So I can't even clean the data because the database is bad. And then you're like, oh, actually it's the server that's bad. So I my first sort of data science job, I ended up managing RStudio server on a Linux server for that organization. And it just became really clear that like that was, I mean, for me, I really enjoyed that. A lot of people do that work and they're like, oh, this is no fun. I do not like this, right? And those people go back to doing, or try and go back to doing data science. I often think that's a losing battle. But for me, I found I really enjoyed that stuff sort of further down the stack. I found I was really interested in like how to manage servers and networking and data and all this kind of stuff. And that was how I ended up here at Posit as a solutions engineer. That's what a lot of the work is. Of doing solutions engineering is this sort of connection between, right, how would you use the Posit products as a data scientist, and how do you set them up so that they work well for the people who want to use them. And so that was a really great fit for me because I obviously cared a lot about what data scientists do day to day, but I really enjoyed like working on a Linux terminal and figuring out how to make it not suck for them. So, that's sort of the answer of like how I got to the point of being a solutions engineer and why I wrote my book, DevOps for Data Science. It's available for free online, do4ds.com. Um, but sort of there's this like broader question of like what is DevOps? And like to me, I think like DevOps is this funny thing where it's like it's a general purpose thing about making computer code not suck when you put it into production. Because right, you have like in like the 90s, you have the agile revolution where everybody's like, oh, we're not gonna like spend years defining requirements, and then it gets super out of date, and then we write a bunch of code and it isn't good. We're gonna do the agile stuff where we like deliver small batches frequently, right? I think probably a lot of people in here have heard of what agile is and probably aspire to it. I think agile is always aspirational, but like it's great. But then there's this question of like, okay, we're writing the code in this agile way, but then it has to like go live, right? The code has to go from being on my computer. I wrote it. I wrote a little agile thing. I like showed it to the customer. The customer's like, this is great. And then you have to like put it into production. And this is where the DevOps part comes from. And so DevOps it's a really mushy term because it's a set of like, it's not, there are tools involved, but it's not just tooling. It's also processes and people and like a philosophy that basically you try and put things into production in a way that works well with agile. So DevOps is this super mushy term. And there are also like a gajillion companies out there that sell DevOps software. And so like shockingly, they're like, DevOps is the thing we do. Wow. Crazy. And so like I think there's a lot of tension on the word DevOps. It's very overloaded. But it is also a real thing, right? It really is this idea that you can deliver, not just create, but deliver software in small increments, right? And I think there's a lot that as data scientists we can learn from those ideas. And one of the reason that I really wanted to write this book was that like you can't just be like, oh, DevOps, and then just like translate it, right? Like you can't just be like, oh, now just do that for data science, because data science is a fundamentally different practice than software engineering. We're not software engineers, right? We're doing a different thing. Um, and so having done the work I'd done with just dozens and hundreds of companies, seeing how they were implementing data science, I wanted to spend some time, digesting those thoughts and then spitting out a book. So that's what I did.
That's awesome. Thank you. I think I want to ask you at least one more question about writing a book, but I realized Mike Smith and I like jinxed at the same time and had the same question for you. So I would love Mike to ask his follow-up question.
Thanks, Libby. I'm not going to hold it against you for stealing my question because it was the obvious one.
Thank you.
So, Alex, I sometimes get people coming to me and saying, hey, Mike, how can I get access to like 128 cores and 64 gigabytes of RAM? And I'm like, well, I could give you the answer to that, or I could ask you why. Why do you need that? What's the problem that you're trying to solve here? And it seems to me that often, like, the weirdest questions come up, and you can give people the quick answer, or you can dive into what is it you're really wanting from this. And so, can you give us tips if you've got experience on how to pivot that question and go from, do you want the quick answer, or do you want to actually find the right solution to the right problem?
Yeah, no, just do that. Like, yeah, Mike, that's exactly. No,
Have I answered my own question?
no, I think no, I think that's exactly right, right? And this is where sort of the principles of DevOps are honestly, and it's funny, like in writing the book, the technical parts were like fine, right? Like, but I sort of felt like I had to write those books to get those parts to get permission to write the parts that were really about like relationships between teams and organizations, which I think is really the crux of what's important here is developing a way to work with other people who have other priorities and have other ways of viewing the mission of the organization, right? And might care about different, right? They might have a different ranking of what they care about. And so I think that's exactly right. And it's funny, actually, it's something I think about a lot in my day job as a solutions engineer as well, because so often we're talking to people who are, they'll come to us and they'll be like, we really need the RENV package to do this. And I'm like, why do you need the RENV package to do that? And you follow that chain like a few steps uphill, and all of a sudden you're going like, whoa, you need a totally different tool, right? That actually would be a better solution. So, Mike, like, all I can say is that, like, I think it's exactly, like, always the right thing to do is to try and take that step back and go, hey, why are we trying to do that? And, in your organization, maybe you have authority to, like, just give somebody that hardware or to show them where to get that hardware. But one of the ways the relationship between data scientists and other parts of the organization can go awry is when data scientists are really hungry for more without necessarily having a lot to show for it. And so I think, like, your question of why do you really need this, you may have the question, but even more so, the, like, person over on the IT team who's responsible for controlling cloud spend, who is going to see this 128 core machine that's been up for 9 months and has cost several $1,000s, and they're like, what is going on here? And maybe that's worthwhile for whatever you're doing, but before you do that, you should probably make sure that you've convinced yourself, at least, that you can, yourself, either you or whoever, that actually is a worthwhile, even if you have permission, making sure that it's a worthwhile, endeavor is I think a great use of time. So
But
I think I just said a lot of words and added nothing to what you said. So
follow up to the follow up then is sometimes the can I just get access is a quick answer, right?
Yeah.
Yeah, sure, I'll give you access. Whereas the alternative is a long process, and someone may go, well, I don't have time to explain this, Mike. And if you don't give them the quick answer, they'll go to someone else who can give them the quick answer.
Yeah, and I think, this is a completely unsatisfying answer, but to me, so much of this is about relationships, right? Like, we are humans working with humans, and it's so tempting, especially as technical people, to want to treat the other humans as, like, the other side of an API where we can just, like, query the API and get what we need. And I think sometimes, actually, if you can get your organization to the place where you have either a literal technical API or a, like, team to team level kind of understanding, that's actually really cool. But a lot of times relationships are what allow you to build that out and get you to the point where, like, that actually is possible, right? I think one of the really important concepts for a data scientist is getting the permission and the ability to have a sandbox where you can play with real data, right? And so, like, getting that sandbox is often a years long endeavor, particularly in a big organization, right? Like, it's years of approvals and building it out and hardware and that kind of stuff. But then once you have the sandbox, right, then it's like, wow, this is magic. And so it is not easy and often requires a lot of just relationship building and that sort of thing. But if you can get it done, it's an incredibly valuable thing to have. And Mike, to your question, right, like, some people are always going to try and go the fast route. Often there's a roadblock somewhere there that all of a sudden happens where maybe you could have avoided it if there's like a tortoise and hare, right? That's a thing, kind of analogy here.
I love it. I feel like relationship building is always my answer to almost every question. I have a lot of people sometimes message me and say, how do you find out about new stuff that's going on? And I'm like, oh, I talk to people. How do you stay abreast of, like, new stuff in the field? I'm like, oh, I talk to people. And they're like, no, I mean, like, a website. I'm like, no, I talk to people. All right. Well, speaking of people, I have a people question from Abigail. Abigail, do you want to unmute and ask this?
So, can you hear me? Is this working?
Yes, I can hear you. It's a little, we can hear people behind you too, but I think we can hear you fine.
So my question is basically, look, like 7 years ago, I got into data science. I had a PhD. My boss had a PhD. My coworkers PhD. Like, it was, or people dropped out of PhD programs. Like, there was a lot of that going on. Like, people were going into data science from being experts in a data thing already. And I think that was really useful. And now a lot of folks aren't doing that, and it's hard for me to like going, you get a bachelor's degree in data science, and now you're a data scientist, and it's hard for me to tell how much it's just like I missed this, and I think people I worked for are really good, versus like no, actually you should have done something with the data before you become a data scientist. Like, what are your thoughts on that?
I think it's a great question. I am biased by my own history here for sure. And also, I've been out of the hiring for data science game for a few years now. So I all those caveats aside, I think it is incredibly valuable for people to have a really strong background in like sort of what I would describe as classical statistics, basically, or something like it, to go into data science. And the reason, one of my first bosses out of college, he had this mantra that it's all about the data generating process. And I love this like idea that like whatever you are trying to do in data science, you are somehow trying to derive some truth about the data generating process. And so having a really strong understanding of what a data generating process is and how you model it, I think is incredibly valuable, right? And some of that is statistics, some of that, right? Like there are all these newfangled machine learning things, right? But like basically all they do is you're removing, and here's my economics background, right? Is like in you can specify basically the parameters of a model, and then you estimate the parameters of that model, right? Like if you're talking about like a linear regression, your parameters are just your betas, right? And yeah, I completely agree. I gave a talk a few years back about like you should just do linear modeling, and I still stand by that talk. But I think like right, so like in a linear regression, you're just estimating the betas, like that's all it is, right? If you're talking about like a neural net, what you've done is you've removed any assumptions about the shape of the underlying data generating process, but now you're estimating millions of parameters instead of like 7. And there are trade-offs there, right? But my opinion, at least, is that if you can't form a reasonably good hypothesis that you will never be able to check about what the data generating data generating process looks like my opinion, and again, I am biased, is that you have no business throwing it all into a black box model and pretending that what comes out is meaningful, because I just don't think that there's like you want to have at least a theory, even if you can't test it, on what is going on here. What am I trying to make sense of that is happening in the world? And that is not to say that like a data science degree doesn't do that. I know from my experience, like statistics and econometrics degrees really get into that point of like, what is the underlying distribution that you are trying to model? What is the underlying process? And so like, I don't think that all those things are a waste of time. This is me just like giving opinions. I have no like standing. I'm just sharing opinions, but like you asked. So that's my opinion, is that as a as a data scientist, you're trying to make sense of the world in some way. And so if you believe that just throwing it into a black box model is enough, to me, like that's sort of an abdication of responsibility. You're kind of like, the model takes care of it. And the reality is that the model is gonna, and this is right, like there's a whole field and literature here on like stretching into the ethics and stuff of data, science and data usage. But a lot of it to me is there's always implicitly a model of the world. And if you're not thinking explicitly about what that model is that you're trying to like bring to light, it's coming to you, and you might not realize it if you're using some sort of very non-parametric model that just estimates a gajillion parameters, weights and biases to spit out some stuff. So again, that's my very biased opinion, but
Totally
Abigail,
okay.
totally agree with the vibe.
Totally okay. You're here to talk about things, and it's okay to have your own opinion on them. And I think that there's a lot of people in the chat probably have their own opinions on these too. Well, speaking of like contentious subjects, Lisa, you have a question. Would you like to ask that?
Sure. I'm trying to find my exact phrase. I just was curious, your thoughts on the phrase "R can't be put into production."
Boo! I mean, that was an easy one, right? Um, no, I think that's complete nonsense. I think, again, there's a question of who is putting it into production and what do you mean by production, right? If you are Visa and you have to serve millions of credit card authorizations, that's probably not millions, probably thousands per second, right? You have to like do fraud checking thousands per second across the entire, like probably R is not the right language for that. Like, but you need to be using like C++ or Rust for that, right? You need to go like real far down the stack for that. I mean, we see R in tons of production contexts here. And the other thing that I would just say is that like often the implicit second half of that sentence is you should use Python, right? Like that's often the implication is like you cannot put R into production and you should use Python. I think Python is a great language. I think that R and Python have a lot of trade-offs against each other. It is not clear to me that Python has such a even today, that there is such a dominating advantage for Python in production systems relative to R, other than that whoever you're talking to probably knows how to put Python in production and probably doesn't know how to put R into production. So, on for most of the at the scales that most of us are working at, right? R in production is plenty performant. Your code is going to matter far more than whether you were to write the same thing in Python. And I think I'm trying to think if I have anything else to say on this, or if like I've just said it all. Like I think I really do think it's hogwash. I think R has a place in a production stack, right? It shouldn't. I also don't. I see some people who try and do everything in R. I've occasionally been that person. I think that's also a mistake. But it is absolutely the case that R can be a part of a really robust production stack and is at a lot of large organizations.
Yeah. I think I would add like your previous statement about it's all about relationship building to the answer to this question, where I know I've been in organizations where it is just that the people who need to deploy these things don't know how to do it in R. And the most successful data scientists in that organization were the ones who reached out and just made friends with the people in IT and gave them a gentle and friendly introduction to R. And then those people in IT went, oh, this code is actually great and clean and functional and works well, and we can totally put this into production. But those wheels had to be greased. So
yeah, absolutely.
+1 for relationship building again. We have a question from Shannon. Shannon, are you still here? Would you like to ask?
Sure. I mean, I'm super appreciative of your book, but I was also wondering if you had any advice for people starting in DevOps with other than read your book.
Yeah, just muck around with stuff. I mean, I'm very firmly of the belief that having some mental models is helpful as a place to start, so you even understand. Like that was sort of why I wrote the book. Is like I think it's helpful to have sort of a framework for what you're doing. But the way to learn this stuff is really to play around with it, right? My book is like so thin on all of these topics. There are books, like every chapter in my book. There's a book, not just a book, like books on each of those things. And so, what I would say here is find something you want to do and then try and do it. And you're going to get, I mean, it's not that dissimilar from learning a programming language, right? You start trying to do things and you hit roadblocks and you figure it out, and go along the way. So like for me, one of my first big tasks that I did that was like DevOpsy was when I got married, I wrote my own wedding website. And then I really wanted to be able to collect RSVPs on the wedding website. But I was hosting the wedding website on GitHub, which doesn't it was a public repo because I wasn't paying for it. And so I needed a way, and I wanted to load the results into a Google Sheet. And so I just needed a place to store my, and there are better ways to do this now, but this was a few years ago now. I basically just need a place to like store my Google credentials and like turn an API call from my wedding website into a row in a Google sheet. And so I like had to figure out how to use AWS Lambda to like receive this stuff from my wedding website and like push it out to a Google sheet. And it wasn't a very complicated process, but I learned a ton just by having to like make a thing that ran in the cloud and didn't break. And like it was like 7 lines of Python code or something, right? The actual coding was trivial, but there was a fair bit of sort of DevOpsy stuff in terms of figuring out how to make that work. And so that's my advice to people is like find something you want to do, whether it's a side project or a work project, and get started. Like y'all are here because you're like smart people who can learn technical stuff. To me, the biggest barrier is, do you have a reason? And I often find that it's like somewhat helpful to read books and that kind of thing to give you a lay of the land, a framework for what's going on. But if you want to really understand it, there's no substitute for just doing some stuff. So that is just find a project you want to work on, and then figure out how to do it after bashing your head against the wall a few dozen times, because that's inevitable.
Ask for help if you're bashing your head against the wall. I really appreciate you saying that, because often my biggest barrier is not having a reason to do something too. My brain doesn't want to do things unless there is a reason to do them. I would love to shift back to book questions for just a minute, because I said I wanted to ask about book questions, and I think it was Adam. Somebody was like, yes, more book questions. And we have one from Neil with an asterisk next to it. So I will read it. And it was, what did you learn most from the process of writing your book?
Yeah, that's an interesting question. I've had a draft blog post here for a while that I keep meaning to post and haven't gotten around to. Something about having a 4-month-old gives you like not that much free time to like write blog posts and stuff. It's weird like that. Nobody warned me that my time would be really busy with a 4-month-old. Who would have thought? For me personally, I have never been a very enthusiastic writer and did not consider myself a particularly good writer. So the main thing I learned is that I am less bad of a writer than I thought, perhaps even good at times. I feel pretty good about the book. Hopefully, if you read it, you think it's like reasonably readable. And I learned a lot about how I write and the way my writing and my thinking is really tied up together. I think when I started the book, I thought that my ideas were way more baked than it turned out they were. And forcing myself to write a book ended up revealing a lot of weakness in the thinking that I had, and forced me to really get precise in a way that I didn't have to before that. And that's really tied up in writing for me. For me, I am some people are different, but like I am an out loud thinker. I do my best thinking out loud. And it turns out that writing also provokes the same kind of thing. And so for me, it was really, really impossible. I did outline my book, but like I couldn't really know if that outline was any good until I started writing and understanding whether like, okay, I wrote this chapter. Now I'm trying to write the next chapter, but I can't really write that chapter because I needed to introduce something in the last chapter that I didn't actually get to. And actually these chapters are in the wrong order and they need to be like split up and recombined anyway. And so I think that was the biggest learning for me, was understanding that like I could create something written that I think is pretty good, but it was a lot of work. It was really hard. And that the fact that I don't really like my first drafts was not forever damning of my ability to write something good with enough time and willingness to go back and polish, which took a lot.
A lot of time. What tool did you use to write your book?
I did all in Quarto. I think the very, very beginning, I started in R Markdown, and then Quarto was out soon thereafter, and I switched over, and oh my God, it was so much better. It's like they literally did take what they learned from 10 years of writing R Markdown, and we're like, oh, let's just include the batteries this time. And in general, I found the Quarto book writing experience to be really great. And obviously the responsiveness of the Quarto team when I had questions and concerns was awesome. Posted stuff on GitHub and that kind of thing. But I had a really good experience. I wrote it in our studio using Quarto, which like is not the place where most people write books, but honestly, like I think it's really easy to get preoccupied with tools and whatever, and it's just like you just got to write a lot of words. Like that's the thing, is it's just a lot of words. And so I tried really hard to not let my tooling get in the way of just doing a lot of writing, because that's really what I had to do.
Wonderful. Thank you. I think that's amazing. And I will echo thank you to the Quarto team, because Quarto's amazing and I love it so, so, so much. Let's see. What do we have here? Which direction can we go? Oh, actually, Emmanuel asked a question that is maybe a little bit silly, but it is definitely still on the book topic. Emmanuel, do you remember what you asked? And if you're still here, would you like to ask it? Oh, okay. I don't hear any unmuting. The question was, in the about the author section of your book, it says that you do handstands in your free time. So what tips do you have for doing a handstand?
Great question. So handstands are about balance, not strength. And if you have crappy shoulders, it's going to take a long time. When you want to work on handstands, it's really tempting to do back to the wall when you're working on them, stomach to the wall, and then trying to like move yourself off is the right way to work on them. Back to the wall makes it really easy to cheat. That's my biggest advice. Also, like, there are lots of great programs online. I really recommend Gold Medal Bodies, gmb.com or gmb.io. They're awesome. I love them as like general fitness people. But they're all like ex-gymnasts who now do like more general fitness stuff, and they're super cool. So, and like their vibes are great. They're all about like doing stuff that feels good and is exciting for you, and not trying to like hurt your body in terrible ways. But yeah, stomach to the wall, I think, is my biggest advice, because it's easy to cheat with back to the wall.
Yes, please don't hurt yourself. We won't be held responsible for any injuries.
Yeah, I am not. This is not medical advice.
Well, I have a question that to kind of like steer back to DevOps. I know we talked about it a little bit in the beginning, but I was wondering if you could talk about, like, is it easier or harder to get DevOps stuff initialized, to convince people that you need foundational stuff in a smaller organization or a bigger organization or mid-size? Because I think a lot of people, as I'm looking at the chat, are like, this is me by myself trying to make this work. And do you have any advice for people at those different
Great question.
sizes?
In my experience, the difficulty of getting DevOps stuff done is like sort of U-shaped, although it's like shallower, right? Like if you have org size going that way, org size going up that way, it's like this, where at a very small organization, you're like probably on your own, but you can do whatever you want. There are no rules, right? At a medium-sized organization, there's like one person who controls all of the stuff, and they're probably awesome at their job. And like that's the dream situation, is there's just like one person, you go talk to them and they'll like have a server for you tomorrow. And then as you get bigger, right, the complexity goes up, the number of teams goes up, the likelihood that you have outsourced IT goes up, and all these things make it more difficult to get things done. Although there are exceptions, right? There are very large organizations that take really seriously making the sort of DevOps experience great. And so there are some large organizations where actually you'll have a really easy and a great time with it. But for the most part, it sort of follows that U shape, where like very small organizations, you're probably doing it yourself. And like you can do it yourself, but you have to learn. It's kind of a pain and you might be scared. Medium-sized organizations, there's like one person and they rule. And then large organizations, it can be really, really complicated. Although once you get it done, it's probably going to be pretty awesome. This is the place where I think I like have to say that, not have to, but like I do believe that like if you want this to be easy, working with your company to get the Posit professional products like makes a lot of this really easy, because from their perspective, all they have to do is support the Posit products, and then you get to sort of do your stuff in a way that abstracts away some of the DevOpsy difficulties. Like that's really what the Posit professional products are for. But but you have to be working with some folks who can install and maintain those things. And obviously there's budget associated with that. So, it's not a perfect answer for everybody. But for a lot of organizations, like that's where my day job of like working with organizations that are trying to buy or have the Posit Professional products, like that's what we talk about, is how do you use those products to enable the data scientists to like be off to the races in so many ways. So that's obviously my little plug there, but
yeah,
again,
small
it
plug.
depends on the size of the organization.
That's true. Actually, I put in the chat, I've experienced ease at a small level and friction at a larger level, but I just realized that I think the ease I felt at the smaller level is I did work for a small consulting firm that did use Posit Connect, and like that's probably why it was easy, because I could just deploy my Shiny app by clicking a button and changing a vanity URL. So yeah, I'd probably have a very biased opinion of that. I have a great question that's a little bit more personal, and I would also really, really love to know this. It's from Michelle Lynn, has an asterisk, so I'm going to read it. It's, how was the transition going from an individual contributor to managing a solutions engineering team, and how did you know that you were ready for that? And I think that you might have managed in previous roles too, so however you want to speak to that.
Yeah, I love this. Like, so my role now, right? Mostly what I do when I'm not writing a book, which is all the time these days, thank God, done with that. I manage a team, and now I like manage managers. So like I think this is this is something that's near and dear to my heart. And actually, I did write an essay on this on my personal blog, about my first year of management and what a amazing experience it was. And that was before I came to Posit. So, I think one of the things about management is that it is a totally different job from doing data science. This is a completely different craft. And it really is a craft. One of the things that I think is really interesting about management, but that has been frustrating to me personally, right? I think many of us probably in this room identify as like a smart person. Like that's a thing that we value about ourselves. And one of the unfortunate things about being, not unfortunate, but one of the things about being a manager is that smart actually doesn't matter nearly as much as like showing up the right way every day. It's really a craft. It's not a sort of knowledge-based thing, right? I've read a lot of books about management, and they help like this much relative to just sort of like showing up right every day and caring about your job. And so when I'm talking to people who might be interested in management and trying to decide whether it's the right path for them, right? To me, a lot of the questions that I try and ask people and try and figure out are like, are you more interested in creating a great work environment for other people than doing the work, right? If you still want to do data science on a day-to-day basis, you should not be a manager. When you, as a manager, right, in my opinion, your job is to create an environment where other people can do their best work, right? Your job is to create a place where they have the right level of sort of managerial oversight, and that level is not zero, contrary to what like certain engineering places will tell you. Like managerial oversight and assistance is really helpful. In particular, I think a lot, if anybody has read Casey Newport's book, World Without Email, very good book, but he really distinguishes between the work and the workflow, right? And how the work of management in a lot of ways is to get the right people together and design the workflows so they can go do the work, where the work is the really like hard thinking about what to do. So to be very concrete, right? Like if we are working with a customer or a prospect at Posit who doesn't have Posit professional tools, right? The work is how to figure out or how to help that customer understand what value the Posit professional tools would bring to them. How does it fit in to their existing data stack? How would they use it? How would it benefit them, right? That's the work. The workflow is like, do they do a proof of concept or not? How do we sign the paperwork for them to, actually acquire the Posit products? How does a person from my team get assigned to work with them? And so to me, if you want to be in a managerial role, you have to be really passionate about that question of helping other people have a really great day at work and a great year and a great career, and care a lot less about like, oh, I want to go write a bunch of code. If you still really want to write code, it's probably not the right moment. In a lot of organizations, there is some flexibility to like try it and see how you feel. If you can be in that kind of environment, I think that's great, because often people don't really know. I will say that like I think a small fraction of people really get joy from management, and management is a slog. Like relative to individual contributor work, where like you build a model and it works and then you're happy, and you like, publish a dashboard and it works and you're happy. Like that's great. As a manager, the wins are way further apart, and like it's way more of a slog in between. And so you really have to be excited and find joy in helping those other people win, and really feel that in what gets you out of bed in the morning. And if that doesn't get you out of bed in the morning, probably not the right fit for you. Now, there are organizations where like the only way to move up is to move into management, and that just kind of sucks. Like increasingly, I think there's a recognition at a lot of organizations that having very senior individual contributor roles and also managerial roles is the right, it is the right way to do it. Some organizations have really recognized this and built out those like very senior individual contributor roles, and other organizations really haven't. And unfortunately, if your organization hasn't sort of recognized that there should be paths to leadership and advancement that are not managerial roles, that's a really hard spot to be in. And unfortunately, I don't have a lot of advice. Like I came to work at Posit, and we do take that really seriously. And I feel very lucky to be in an environment that takes that really, really seriously, because it's a much harder conversation to have with somebody who might want to be a manager, and you're trying to tell them, I don't think you want to be a manager, if you don't have a great alternative for them, right? When you have the alternative, senior individual contributor, that's cool. If you're just like, no, and then you can't get promoted, I don't know how to have that conversation. I don't have a lot of advice, unfortunately.
That's tough. This is one of those topics I would love to have kind of a whole hangout on, just like a topic-based hangout, is what are people seeing and experiencing with the sort of ceiling that technical people hit before you end up not being able to get a raise unless you manage people.
Yeah.
If you would like to talk about that, let me know in the chat.
Yeah. Certainly if you look at, right, and I think this is starting to come to data science, but if you look at mature software organizations, right, like Microsoft, Adobe, these organizations have, they're very staff engineers, fellows, right, these very, very high level titles, where there may be people like all more or less in the C-suite who are individual contributors. And I think that's really appropriate, and the way it should be. I think some of those models have not fully moved into data science yet, and there's I'm hopeful that they will. I will just say, this is if you can't tell, this is a topic I'm like really passionate about, and if folks want to look me up on LinkedIn, I'm happy to like chat with people about this topic, because I find it, it's why I think I'm well suited to be in management, because I love talking about this part of it. I can talk about linear models, but like really this is the part that I love.
That's that part of the question that says, how'd you know you were ready? Maybe that's it. I started caring about the people stuff a lot and feeling passionate about it.
It's actually a great question. It actually, to me, links up with the DevOps part, which is like, as I became more senior, I started like mentoring people on a technical level. And there was this pull to like go down the stack, kind of, right? Like I started, like building packages to help them do things in R. And then, and felt that same pull to sort of go down the stack, in a variety of ways. So I think that to me was an indication. And obviously I didn't know a lot of this until after I became a manager and then had done it for a while. So.
Well, I have another manager question for you. Maybe we can slide it in really quickly. We've only got 10 minutes left. It's from Slido, so it's anonymous and I will read it. Broadly speaking, as a manager, what is one skill that you wish was better developed in your staff? And I will let you take that any direction that you want to.
I'm going to reject the premise of the question.
I was just thinking maybe this question needs to be reworded just a little bit.
Yeah, I would say this is something that I select for really heavily in hiring. And I think it is crucial for solutions engineering and also for data scientists. And that is curiosity. Like number one by far is curiosity. I tell people when I am in a hiring process, I make about 90% of my decision based on the questions the other person asks me. I basically think of the like part where I ask them questions, which is for me, I split my interviews about in half. So I spend about half of it asking them questions and then like leave their questions for about half. And to me, and this is especially true in roles where, right, like a solutions engineering role where you are working with people. And I think most roles you work with people. I don't know of any where you actually don't. To me, I'm actually much more interested in what has this person learned over the first, over reading the job interview and or the job posting and that sort of thing. And then what questions do they have on the back of that? Are they asking good questions or are they asking questions that like are like way off topic and are clear that they like haven't understood what we're doing here? Or are they asking questions that really get to the heart of the work? That to me is really important. And so I would say this is a quality that is very well developed on the team that I'm a part of because we really pay a lot of attention to it in hiring. But I think to me, curiosity will kind of take you everywhere. And it is something, the other question is that there's a lot of things that are really hard to select for in hiring. Like it's really hard to assess how good is somebody at working with other people. Like you can get a vibe for it, but like it's pretty hard to assess. You can pretty well assess in an interview whether somebody is a curious person and whether they'll be able to bring that curiosity to work. And so I think it is something that is unusually easy to assess in an interview and generally a very positive sign if somebody seems curious. And by curious, I mean not just like, oh, I have a lot of questions, but like thinks about what they're hearing and then asks good questions as a result that really get to the heart of what we might be talking about in a job interview. But to me, that's an essential skill as a solutions engineer and as a data scientist. Like that's what you're doing is asking questions. And, again, to get back to the, like, it's all about the data generating process, right? When you see something weird happening in the data, do you just sort of hand wave it away or do you get curious and try and figure out what's going on? I'm sure all of you have had the experience of like, dodging some really weird mistake in your data because you, asked a question that turned out like that missing data is missing and it means something when it's missing. It's not just sort of missing or the opposite, right? I know we've all, many of us, I've certainly had that experience. I know many of us have had that experience. And so I think both in data science and in solutions engineering, it's just a absolutely critical attribute for people to bring.
I agree. Sweet. Okay, I've got one more book question, but a technical book question from
Great.
Stephanie. Stephanie, are you here? Would you like to ask your question?
You are lucky. I was just about to hang up to go to a meeting.
All right, yay.
I was wondering, wrapping up a book with CRC, and we chose our Markdown instead of Quarto because we were struggling a lot with their template for getting PDF. And how much did you fight with that with Quarto, or I don't know why we had so much problems.
Yeah,
for the LaTeX side.
Yeah, I didn't have a ton of trouble with their template. It worked quite smoothly. I don't know. Are you working with Randy? I was working with Randy.
No.
Okay.
No.
But we didn't have a lot of trouble with the template. There were some issues with like LaTeX, there's always.
Oh yeah, that's where we are. We're in Overleaf and doing the final,
that
the
part
final LaTeX tweaking now.
It's such a slog. It's such a slog. But no, we did not. With Quarto, the template part was super easy.
Okay.
There were lots of little nitpicky things, but it was all little nitpicky things. The templating and that kind of stuff was super easy.
Okay.
Awesome. technical stuff is always tough. And LaTeX is just always.
Yeah. And
tough.
Stephanie, if you want to hit me up offline, the underscore quarto.yaml in my in the public version is the version for the like for the GitHub version. But if you want to take a look at what I did on the LaTeX side, just hit me up on LinkedIn or X, Twitter, or something, and I will happily share what I've got.
That is a very generous offer. Thank you. I know a lot of people end up with CRC in our community, so that's awesome. Okay, we've got a few more minutes left, and Neil asked a great question that I think a lot of people also ask, and it's got an asterisk next to it. So on the topic of Python and R, is it realistic to use a mix of R and Python in the same pipeline?
Yes, absolutely. The question is, where do you make them meet, right? Like where do you force them to interact? You can, with Quarto, have them like in interleaving in different chunks in one document. I would argue to do that would be a mistake. It is just like a lot of headache that I don't think you need to try and render one Quarto document with both R and Python. I think in general, something that data scientists can learn, and this is, I think it's chapter 3 in the book or something. One thing that data scientists could really take from software engineering, this is sort of DevOps, but more just software engineering, is like really thinking about the structure of the work that we're doing and how to create clean divisions between different parts of a project. And so for me, I would say like you absolutely can use both R and Python in one pipeline. I would recommend if you're doing that, like they should communicate via API through JSON or something else, right? Maybe you write to like a database or a, Parquet file or something, but like you want a pretty clear line of delineation, I think, between them, because if you're doing tasks that are different enough that it's best to write them in different programming languages, you want sort of a clear handoff. And so designing a project so that there are clear handoffs from one stage to the next, and if you want to do cross languages from language to language, I think is really important. And I think one flaw that many data scientists have is that we just don't have training as software engineers. And so one thing that I think is worth spending some time thinking about is like, where are there opportunities to create a clear handoff and abstraction point in the project that I'm doing? So in the book, I talk a lot about like, there's this concept in software engineering of 3-layer apps, right? There's the front end, the business logic, and the data layer. And like, you can get, like, there are all kinds of like different ways to think about this. And like, oh no, the 3-layer app sucks. Oh no, it's great. Oh no, it sucks, right? Like, whatever, I don't care. But having any sort of framework that you're trying to hit in terms of how the parts of your project fit together, I think is really, really helpful, right? It's like the meta, right? It's like how you take your spaghetti code and turn it into functions. It's the like one level up version from that. Is how do you structure the actual components of a project? I think it's something that many data scientists should probably do more of. And again, if you're going to go cross language, probably a good sign that you should have some real handoff.
Awesome. All right. Well, we've made it to the top of the hour. Alex, thank you
Didn't
so
drop, Libby.
much. We didn't die. Yeah, we're
No
good.
vomit. We did great.
No passing out. That was a real possibility. There are some questions that we didn't get to answer. Everybody's questions were amazing. Thank you. I might sneak into Alex's DMs and ask him a couple of these just so I can put the answers on LinkedIn. So find me on LinkedIn. I don't even have my own LinkedIn as a link. I'm the only Libby Heron on LinkedIn. So type my name and then you will find me. And maybe I'll post some extra answers from Alex later today. Thank you so much, everybody, for coming. I hope you have a wonderful day, Alex. Thank you so much. And thank you again to
Thanks
Isabella,
for coming.
Curtis, Randy. Thank you. Bye, everybody.